It's depressing as soon as you walk in. I wake up with an absolutely banging headache. The smell on our clothes, I mean, everybody comments it's embarrassing. Our daughter doesn't want to be here. She can't bring friends home because she's embarrassed of our home. And she didn't even want me to do this interview because she thinks everybody's going to laugh at her look at the state of what we're living in.
I'm in a flat in Manchester with Angela Price. She's agreed to let our cameras into her home, and I can see why her daughter doesn't want us here.
Clothes have gone, carpets have gone, 15 electrical items alone have just blown, they've gone.
Angela had warned me, but it stinks. Raw sewage has poured into this ground floor flat, caused by a leak which the family has battled for weeks without any help.
Once you've had a shower, the smell's just horrific. It hits you, it really comes out.
And as Angela shows me the bathroom, it gets worse. I look up and it's just like I'd seen in Leroy's bedroom in Croydon. Thick, black, furry mould stretches across the entire ceiling.
You're living in it, there's no way out whatsoever, there's no way out.
Once again, it's not a rogue private landlord profiting from Angela's misery, ignoring her. This is social housing that's forcing the family of three to live like this.
I want out, it's not my home anymore. And it'll never be my home again because they've just absolutely destroyed it.
Really?
Yeah, it's just a nightmare. We're all living a nightmare.
Angela was among the first to reach out to us after our report in Croydon had aired. Imogen and I, by now, were working through the hundreds and hundreds of emails from tenants across Britain, all with shocking stories of disrepair and disdain. So I go to Birmingham and meet Kaylee, whose kitchen ceiling has fallen through as she looked after her baby in the room next door.
We've had leaks constantly. When the council come out, they don't sort the problem out. To be honest, I can't live like it anymore. It's horrible.
And then on to Dagenham, where Alana and her young sisters are sleeping on bunk beds in a mould-ridden bedroom, leaving their dad in despair.
I don't get it. I don't understand how no one takes any action or responsibility for it.
They are all part of a pattern, proving that Franzoy and Leroy in Croydon are not an isolated case. And in the days, weeks that follow, more and more stories of mould, damage and leaks flood into our inbox from all corners of the nation. And with every one comes the complaint that nothing is being done about it. This is the state of social housing in 21st century Britain, and I am now the journalist at the heart of a national scandal.
I feel just neglected. I just don't even feel like I'm human.
Have you told them about the problems in here?
I told them, so they don't care.
I have nowhere to go. I can't believe that this is happening.
I think it's disgusting.
You're not seriously saying the government have nothing to do with this?
Told them! I told them!
I want to see those homes built that the people of this country desperately need.
I don't want to be living in this condition.
Episode 2, The Power of Shame. I've just parked up on Summer Lane in Walsall, and I'm standing in front of the home that my dad grew up in. He moved to as a little boy. It's a 3-bedroom, semi-detached house. Same picket fence round the front garden. Looks like the same white front door that I remember, with a little side gate round to the back where my granddad had a greenhouse in a pretty decent-sized garden. This house, in many ways, saved my dad's life. It saved the life of my nan and granddad and his brothers and sisters, because in the 1950s they were living in slum housing in a tiny 2-up, 2-down terraced house with mould and damp. And I remember my dad telling me when I was a kid that the tiles on the floor would rumble as the rats ran underneath. And when he was much younger, there'd been a fire at the house, and the lodger that my nan and granddad lived with died in the fire. And yet they carried on living there afterwards because they had no other choice. And when they heard of the council houses being built in the area, they went onto the waiting list and they got one, and they moved into the house I'm now stood in front of. And this house saved their life. It changed everything. A decent, safe, affordable home allowed them to build happy, healthy lives. And I remember coming here as a kid and my nan making me Irish stew and milky tea, and I'd sit in the kitchen at the back, the kitchen that had a carpet, which I remember thinking was so luxurious, having a carpet in your kitchen. I want to have a carpet in my kitchen when I'm older. I I remember thinking. That was my view of social housing, of council housing. It's obviously a rose-tinted view, the view of a child, and lots of people would have had the exact opposite experience living in council housing in the 1950s and 60s. But within a few days of walking into that flat in Croydon, my view completely changed. And as I travelled the country and met more and more people, as our inbox filled up with more and more appalling stories, I started to see a very different side of modern social housing. And it wasn't just in person, and it wasn't just in our inbox. We'd also started to see some awful stories on social media too.
The ceiling's about to collapse. It's gonna collapse. It's going to collapse, right? Can you see this? This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. No.
Housing just became 100% of what I did, morning, noon and night.
This is my boss, Imogen Barra.
I remember I was even out with my husband for lunch. It was like a Sunday lunch. I just happened to see on Instagram this video that an influencer had reposted, and she said, this is my cousin. Her ceiling's just collapsed.
Hold them! Hold them! Hold them! I told them!
And I was like, I have to get her. I have to talk to her. And she spoke to her cousin. She put me in touch with her, and that was Nicole.
And she quite clearly was traumatised by it.
The ceiling's fallen down on me. The ceiling's come down. Oh, I can't believe this. I'm almost died.
The video which showed her whole ceiling collapsing. That wasn't the first time it happened. That was the second time it happened. And the first time it happened, it fell on her and injured her. And then the second time, it very nearly missed her and her son.
We stood in her flat. She was so emotional.
My son could have been sleeping there. My son, that's his favourite spot.
Often as a reporter, one of the first things your boss, i.e. you, would ask me was like, what were they like? Were they emotional? Were they angry? And 90% of the time the answer was no. I said to you, they're so dejected and disillusioned and just accepting of their situation. Nicole was the exact opposite because it just happened. It was so live to her. And I think her anger was this sense of just not being listened to.
After Grenfell, we were going to have a voice, and we haven't been heard, nothing. It's not fair, I just want to leave. I don't want to be living in these conditions.
As the journalist who had stumbled upon this scandal, I was learning some hard truths, and fast. Firstly, that social housing is not niche. Nicole and her son, it turns out, are one of 4 million households housed by the state. And if you're thinking that's 4 million households being housed for free or paid for by you and me as taxpayers, then you're wrong. The majority of people we meet who contact us are working. They are paying rent, like a tenant pays a private landlord. Their landlord just happens to be a council or a housing association. And if you're wondering, like I did, what a housing association actually is, it's a not-for-profit organisation set up to provide affordable housing. They're not funded by the government, so run much like a business. This was all news to me at the start of the investigation, and it's fair to say for most of our newsroom too. And the other thing that becomes clear the more I film is that this is a health story as much as a housing story. Almost everyone Imogen and I speak to tell us the same thing. Their home is making them and their family sick.
My kids, they are not sleep. When they wake up, they say, we couldn't sleep, Mama. We didn't have because of the dust and the mold.
My younger sister, she coughs during the night and she wakes up with like blocked noses.
It's making me really feel depressed because I really feel worried for the health of my own kids. I contacted my landlord who have done nothing about it.
Person after person we met would describe the same conditions, the hacking coughs, the asthma, the skin conditions, and that kind of, the smell. We were seeing people whose lives were being ruined and just battling worsening health problems. And then we found someone who was literally dying in squalor.
So obviously this is my bedroom. As you can see, this is where I don't want to sleep with all the damp.
Julie had an extreme mould infestation in her flat, mainly in her bedroom and the bathroom. In a one-bedroom flat, that meant she was sleeping in the living room. And Julie needed space and care more than most because she was dying.
Last year I was diagnosed with lung cancer, brain, liver, Last week I was diagnosed with on my bladder and half my lungs collapsed now.
Julie was doing rounds of intense chemotherapy and had breathing equipment coming out of her nose. She was already struggling to breathe from the cancer, but of course this was made even worse because of the mould. She told me she'd last complained 5 months ago and nothing had happened. She didn't know how much of her life she had left, but knew she didn't want to spend another second of it in this.
So it upsets me. All I want is just, someone just to say, just come out and say it's not condensation. And no, that's all of us get is condensation. And yeah.
Julie's story was very close to home for both Imogen and me.
Both of our mums died of cancer, and that was immediately the first thing I thought of about, how ill my mum was at the end of her life, and would I have wanted her in a place like this? And I remember we said to each other, we just can't let her die here.
We just had to get her out of there, as fast as possible.
So Imogen called a press officer from the housing provider, which was looking after Julie's property in Newquay for a private landlord.
And she was just trying to throw these kinds of excuses at me, oh, well, she has a dog, and she's not meant to have a dog. And I was like, are you telling me that a woman who's dying of terminal cancer who lives in this mould-infested house isn't allowed to have a dog? And she kind of couldn't even, defend it, and she kind of laughed nervously and said, yeah, I know.
I remember you come off the phone and telling me that.
That was probably my friend's away moment, my shaking with rage.
Yeah.
I was just so angry.
And for me, it just showed how inhumane the system was, that they knew Julie had cancer. They knew it was terminal. They knew she didn't have long left to live, and yet they still left her there. That's what I could not get my head around.
We had such a huge reaction to her story. I remember the inbox was just flooded again with people wanting to help her, wanting to donate money, offering up their spare rooms for her to move into.
And within 24 hours, she was back on the news.
If you're watching last night's programme, you will not have forgotten the awful, the frankly disgusting conditions that cancer patient Julie Roberts was living out her life. Well, after appearing on News at 10 last night, something has been done, funnily enough. The management company which runs the property has offered her a 2-bedroom home to move into by the end of next week. That is great news, clearly, though it doesn't change the fact we have been deluged by similar stories. And Dan, whose story it was, joins me now.
It showed the power of the media to shame people, effectively, because we knew Julie had been complaining about this for ages. Her friend had been complaining on her behalf, and then within, less than a day after you'd spoken to them, she was moved. And she was moved to a house with a garden, and it was a home. It was the best place she'd ever lived, is the way she described it to us.
To open that front door and sit in, and literally no stairs, sit on the sofa, watch TV and chill out, or go and sit in the garden with my dog. That'd be amazing. So I'm so happy.
This was unlike anything I'd ever worked on, because we were dealing with people in the most desperate situations, and we have a huge duty of care to the people we speak to. We contact them for days and weeks and months, sometimes still years afterwards, but it just felt like this was different to other stories.
Yeah, because we knew that Julie was still very sick,
yeah,
and that she wouldn't have long to live, which was absolutely devastating. But for her remaining days, she had got her freedom back, and that was the best feeling in the world.
Julie had been paying her housing provider rent, and the more and more homes like hers that I visited, all of them riddled, plagued with fixable problems, I started to think, where's the money going? Because it certainly isn't going on repairs. And so I started to dig into the business models and discover these not-for-profit housing associations are not just providing homes, but building them too, not just for tenants, but to sell to private citizens, and generating a ton of money out of it. The turnover of the biggest firms is in the hundreds of millions, and they were paying their bosses £200,000, £300,000 a year, plus bonuses to keep it that way. They clearly have enough money to sort out repairs to their existing stock if they wanted to. So we kept following the money. Whenever a tenant emails, I looked at the financial returns of their housing association. which is what happened with Bromford Housing when Terry contacted us about her horror flat in Bristol.
I've complained about it in total about 5 or 6 times now. Even my nursery has, because I was getting reports of my son's clothes being damp in his nursery bag and the clothes smelling of damp. I feel really trapped in there.
In each place we film, you're always looking for something unexpected to bring home to the viewer how bad things had got for people. In Terry's flat, it was the nails in the wall. They were hammered into the wallpaper to stop it peeling off. That's how bad the damp had got. And, yet again, it was making her 2 kids sick.
It's not my fault, but I can't do anything about it. It just depresses me. I'm like, with my anxiety as well, I just feel like I'm crying out for help and I'm not getting it.
Terry had called Bromford Housing Association over and over again, but, well, you know the story by now. A quick Google revealed Bromford turned over £266 million as Terry's children coughed up their lungs in their sleep. I took my findings to them and their representative, Paul Coates.
I think the pictures are kind of shocking and they're unacceptable and they fall well below the standard that we expect of a Bromford home.
Could you live in a property like that?
No. I mean, no one could. You know, it is unacceptable that a home has caused that impact and she's had that experience. As an organisation, we invest a lot of money in our homes. You know, we absolutely pride ourselves on delivering kind of first-rate services.
Clearly this isn't a money issue. You have the money to fix these problems. You also have the money to pay your CEO £244,000 a year. Do you think he's earned that?
Robert Netterton is very good at his job. He delivers.
Is he worth £244,000 a year?
So the chief executive's salary is set by the board.
Shame is a powerful emotion. In the social housing sector, it had started to feel like a currency, and emails from us were worth much more than their own tenants, whose rent paid their wages. Back in Croydon, it had got Franzoy and Leroy out of their horror flats. Franzoy and Leroy, remember, had been emailing and calling Croydon Council for years, begging them for help, for basic repairs, but got nowhere. It had taken one email from us on a Friday afternoon to the council's press office as we prepared to air their story, and suddenly everything changed. Both were moved out of Regina Road the very same day. One email. Franzoy and Leroy had both said the council didn't care about them. Well, they seemed to care all of a sudden, though not enough for the council leader joining me on a Zoom call to pick up the phone, it seemed.
I've not had an opportunity, I've not been able to make contact with Ms Hewitt.
What have you been doing that's more important than contacting the woman living in the worst housing conditions in Britain?
No, but yeah, it's absolutely a priority for the organisation. But one of the questions that I'm raising...
Because you haven't done it.
Franzoy and her boys had been moved into a budget hotel, with no fridge, no washing machine, no cooking facilities, but they were safe, and they hadn't been able to say that for a long time. Meanwhile, on Zoom, the council leader, Hamida Ali, was still trying to grasp the basic facts of the case.
I share absolutely everyone's level of shock and outrage at what viewers would have seen. That's why we acted immediately to make sure that our residents were relocated. We have launched an inquiry that will be independently led.
You said there that we acted immediately. For over 4 months, residents have been telling you about this. Over 4 months, they've been living in those conditions.
You're absolutely right. That is one of the things that I want to understand. Why on earth this could have happened?
Hamida Ali was sorry, as she kept telling me, but was unable to explain, well, pretty much anything.
What is going on at Croydon Council that you don't know how your residents are living?
That is one of the most fundamental questions that this action...
It's an unbelievable question that I have to ask you, and you can't, as the council leader, answer it.
So with no clue from the top of the organisation, it would be up to an independent inquiry into Croydon Council to answer our key questions. Why had Franzoy and Leroy been treated with such disdain? Why had repairmen turned up and left without repairing anything? The council had promised to listen and learn, so they invited Franzoy along to address the whole council in the council chamber, in a room full of the councillors and staff who'd ignored her and other tenants for years. They were about to get it with both barrels.
To be quite honest, none of the tenants in Croydon trust anybody in the council, because as far as they're concerned, you're all for yourself. It's like you guys put them in homes and say you might as well go commit suicide, because we don't really give a because we've done our jobs already. We've housed you, we put a roof over your head, and that's it. We've put the files in the archives, and that's that. And you move on to the next person, and you do the same thing to the next person, and the next person, and the next person, and it's just ongoing. And when does it stop?
Stunned silence. It was a side to Franzoy I had not seen before. But would the independent inquiry into Croydon Council be as damning? Finally, almost 2 months after we discovered the state-run squalor in Regina Road, we got our answer.
Today, an independent report identified a series of council failings, among them incompetence and a lack of care for residents who were looked down upon and ignored, putting lives at risk.
I visited Franzoy to get her reaction to an utterly damning report that her courage and bravery had made happen. Her stay in the hotel hadn't lasted long. Both her and Leroy had been given new accommodation. In Franzoy's case, a 2-bedroom flat by Croydon Council, guaranteed for life. It was bigger than Regina Road, over 2 floors, light, spacious and clean. As I walked in for the first time, I spotted a child's drawing stuck to the wall in the hallway. It was a colourful crayon picture of a house drawn by Franzoy's 2 sons. It showed the stairs up to their new bedroom. In child's writing, it was titled Nice House. They had drawn it on the day they'd arrived. Franzoy now had the keys to a home the council previously told her was impossible for her family to be housed in, all while forcing them to endure living hell.
You can't just treat people like that and do that to another human being and expect to get away with it.
Do you worry they are going to get away with it, as you put it?
They are going to get away with it, because who's going to hold them accountable?
Interviewing the council leader Hamida Ali once again, this time in person, it was hard to disagree.
One thing the report says is that no one takes responsibility. How can you say we're being held to account if nothing and no one is changing their position?
Well, I think the investigation from the investigators was a first step. That was a fact-finding investigation to see what happened.
No one had resigned. No one had been sacked. No one was even considering their position. Here was a leader who still seemed not to grasp exactly why things had gone so badly wrong.
And it's shocking that our council residents came to you to present those cases to us rather than coming to us. That shows that.
Well, they did come to you. They did come to you.
Indeed.
Time and time again.
Absolutely. And that's what I want to change.
They came to us out of desperation.
Yes, I absolutely.
Because you weren't listening to them.
I'm not sure what I was expecting, to be honest. This is a council condemned as uncaring and incompetent, so why would its leader be able to explain why this had happened? I had seen for myself what had gone wrong. Now it was there in black and white. The question was how they got away with it, and for so long. Franzoy was telling everyone, anyone that would listen, yet no one stepped in, no one was holding Croydon to account. But her bravery was having a much wider impact. The ripples of our report were in motion, motivating even the nation's youngest tenants to stand up and fight.
I remember watching the first piece with Franzoy. I had gone to see my mum at that point, and I was stood in the front room and I was watching it. I remember the leaks. I remember the fridge. I remember the fact that they were at risk of electrocution. I was so horrified by it. That's when I realised things were much bigger than just me or my estate or my situation.
Standing in his mum's living room, teenager Kwejo Tweneboa saw Franzoy's life as a mirror of his own. The one that had started when he moved with his dad and 2 sisters onto an estate in southwest London in 2018.
The estate, I believe, was built in and around the 1970s, and it was just falling to bits. It was the vermin that were the biggest problem for us, because it was just, absolutely horrific. You wouldn't want to cook in the kitchen because you didn't want to open a drawer in case a mouse came out or whatnot, and those were the things we had been complaining about from the get-go.
And then, less than a year after moving in, near the end of 2018, Kwejo's dad became ill.
He was diagnosed with stage 1 esophageal cancer. He went from being able to eat because the tumour was in his esophagus, no longer being able to swallow his own saliva, so he would vomit every about 5 minutes, and that would be his saliva. He couldn't eat, he couldn't drink any water or anything like that, even through the summer. We had district nurses coming in. They were horrified at the conditions. They couldn't even bath him in the bath upstairs. No one should have been in that home in that state that it was, never mind someone dying from cancer.
In 2020, less than 2 years after moving into Eastfields, Kwejo's father passed away. He and his sisters organised the funeral and started taking care of arrangements, including notifying their landlord. Kwejo's father was a tenant of Clarion Housing Association. You may never have heard of them, but they're not just the biggest housing provider in the UK, but the whole of Europe, making slick promo videos like this one.
350,000 people call a Clarion home their home.
We complete approximately 1,000 repairs every day.
And last year, we built over 2,000 new homes.
And helped more than 4,000 people into work. Supporting residents, improving homes and developing communities
Is at the heart of everything we do.
We're standing up for residents to make sure they're heard.
We are Clarion Housing.
Kwejo was not part of that promo video, and here's why.
Obviously, we had to notify them that Dad had died, and I received a response back, and it was, "We're so sorry to hear that your dad's passed away," and pretty much ended with, "Here is your notice to move out." I was very much suicidal at that point, and I went to my GP because I was at my end, and I was so exhausted and so tired. We haven't even grieved or been through that grief process yet, but they want the place back. And then I thought to myself, he didn't go through everything that he had up until that point. The temporary accommodations have taken us to the council, sitting there all day, having people speak down to him, for us then to just give up and say, "Here's the keys," but like, where would we go?
So Kwejo fought back. It was the start of the pandemic, and faced with the headache of kicking him and his sisters out, Clarion reluctantly agreed to let them succeed the tenancy and stay, but with the caveat that no one in their family could succeed them afterwards.
I remember that housing officer coming and getting me to sign the tenancy, and he said to me, "Oh yeah, I remember your dad coming in and he told us he had cancer."
Clarion were aware Kwejo's dad had cancer and was living in squalor, and yet they did nothing. Remember, we're talking here about a company that boasts of
Standing up for residents to make sure they're heard.
While also trying to evict the sons and daughters of tenants who just died, that stands up for the little guy from its central office in a glitzy London skyscraper, where its CEO, Claire Miller, earns more than £350,000 a year, overseeing a tightly controlled, positive public image. But Kwejo was about to challenge that.
I thought I have to embarrass them, I have to shame them, I have to show people what is going on, what's actually been happening, because I wanted to teach them a lesson, quite frankly. I didn't care that they were the biggest housing association in Europe. I didn't care who the CEO was or how much she was earning at that point. At that point, she didn't know who I was, but I was determined to change that.
So that was the challenge that faced Kwejo at 19. How could he shock and shame the biggest housing provider in Europe? We were about to find out just how dangerous a teenager with a Twitter account can be. Next time on The Trapped, Kwejo opens the floodgates.
I had to go to the head teacher's office and say, like, I've done this and it's pretty much blowing up on social media. I don't know if I'm in trouble.
We find entrenched squalor going back decades.
Why is there a hole there?
I don't know. When I come here, it was here.
So it's been like that for 27 years?
Yes.
Have you told them about the problems in here?
I told them. So they don't care. They don't care.
And the excuses keep on coming.
So I haven't been to Eastfields over the last year because of the pandemic. So I am.
But you're here today. You're in a room with me today.
I'm here today, and I am going to be.
Surely your tenants are your priority here.
If you want to see any of the visuals from this series, head to thetrapped.co.uk or follow the link in the show notes. If you are in bad housing or your living situation is under threat, you'll also find a full list of people to contact to get help. The Trapped is presented by me, Daniel Hewitt, alongside Imogen Barra. It's written by myself and David Williams, with archiving by Alpha Ceesay and Lauren Aarons. Audio production and sound design is by Make Parry and Jack Soper. The series is produced and directed by David Williams. The executive producers are Matt Williams and Ed Saunt.